Imagine waking up in a medieval asylum in 1347, with no recollection of how you got there. This era treated mental illness with brutal methods. Chains, cold stone cells, and cures that would appall us today. Yet, everyone keeps calling you by a name that isn't yours, and the monks seem terrified when you speak. To grasp the nightmare you're in, you need to understand how people ended up here. In medieval times, madness wasn't a medical diagnosis. It was a community decision. Local priests and authorities simply declared anyone insane if their behavior was disruptive or inconvenient. The criteria were incredibly broad. Intense sadness, a woman going through menopause, or even epilepsy could label you as mad. Being left-handed even raised suspicions. Essentially, medieval authorities had the diagnostic accuracy of a fortune, telling toy, but with far greater conviction. Women faced especially harsh judgments. Widows who grieved too much, unmarried women who turned down marriage proposals, or any woman deemed too talkative or too quiet, all were considered signs of female hysteria. Simply being a woman was practically a pre-existing condition for being labelled mentally ill. There were no medical examinations or tests, just neighbourhood gossip and public behaviour. If enough people complained about you, you could be dragged away in chains. It was like a system of online reviews, but instead of a bad restaurant rating, you got a life sentence. Anyone could be declared insane for almost any reason. Your only hope for survival was to remain unnoticed and avoid offending anyone. One bad day, one enemy, one misunderstood moment, and you could find yourself chained to a stone wall, wondering how your normal life disintegrated so quickly. These accusations clung to you like tar. Once someone whispered, "You might be mad," everyone started looking for evidence. Every unusual action was exaggerated until the label became your entire identity. Once you were trapped, your first experience would be waking up in a living hell. Instead of sunlight or a gentle awakening, you'd feel the biting cold of metal digging into your wrists. Heavy iron restraints, unforgiving and unpadded, were bolted directly to the bedposts. Modern handcuffs offer some comfort, but medieval ones came with the added bonus of tetanus and a permanent grip. Your bed was no bed at all. There was no mattress or pillow, just straw teeming with bugs, dirt, and bodily fluids that had accumulated for who knows how long. While luxury hotels brag about thread count, medieval asylums considered hay to be premium bedding, complete with integrated insect entertainment. Guards woke patients by jabbing them with wooden sticks, hard pokes that left bruises. It was like the world's most dreadful alarm clock, where hitting snooze resulted in a beating, and there was no off button. If you resisted or complained, punishment was swift. Cold water would be splashed in your face, sometimes even entire buckets dumped over your head in winter. It was as if customer service complaints were resolved with ice water instead of a manager. This was considered routine treatment. Guards genuinely believed their harshness was helpful. Every morning began with pain, fear, and the bleak realization that yesterday wasn't just a bad dream, and this was only the start of what they'd strip away from you. Patient clothing was passed down from person to person, year after year. The same tattered tunics that previous patients had worn, sweated in, bled on, and died in. There was no washing between uses. It was like buying clothes from a thrift store where everyone had died in them, and there was no return policy. Along with the filthy clothing, shoes were prohibited, as were belts. Anything that could be used as a weapon was removed. Patients had no undergarments, just a single coarse tunic that barely covered their bodies. Medieval fashion seemed to be a one-size-fits-none approach with no accessories allowed, and the dress code enforced by individuals carrying clubs. But the humiliation didn't stop at clothing. Hair was completely shaved off. Guards claimed this prevented lice, but it was primarily about control and degradation. They used dull razors that pulled and cut, sometimes leaving patches to make patients appear more unsettling to visitors. The barbers, it seemed, were trained by people who mowed lawns with butter knives and learned anatomy from stick figures. Despite the head shaving, body lice were rampant. These tiny insects lived in clothing seams and bedding, biting constantly and causing intense itching and infections. The method for pest control was essentially giving everyone buzz cuts and hoping for the best. Adding to the misery was the overwhelming stench. Human waste mingled with sweat, mold, blood, and rotting food. Fresh air was considered dangerous for mad people, so windows remained closed. Guards even covered their noses with cloth, when entering patient areas. After all this treatment, your reflection would be unrecognizable: a bald head, hollow eyes, torn clothing, and skin marked by restraints. The transformation systematically stripped away your humanity, and once your dignity was gone, your body would begin to demand something even more fundamental. Breakfast wasn't served, it was dumped. Moldy bread crusts, days old, congealed stew with unidentified meat chunks floating in grease, water so thick with ash and dirt you couldn't see through it. The food was so dreadful that vultures would likely demand a refund and file a complaint with the health department. Meals were thrown into wooden bowls or directly onto the floor. Patients ate with their hands because utensils were deemed dangerous weapons. Apparently, forks were too risky, but starving people fighting over scraps was considered perfectly safe management. There was no set eating schedule. Guards fed patients when they remembered or felt like it. Sometimes meals came 3 times a day, sometimes once, sometimes not at all. It was like playing mealtime roulette, where the house always won, and the prize was questionable soup. Fights over food happened daily. Desperate patients stole scraps from each other, leading to violence that guards usually ignored. Unless someone was seriously injured, staff allowed patients to battle over moldy bread crusts. Dinner and a show meant watching people fight over garbage while you ate actual food. The quality was intentionally poor. Spoiled vegetables, rancid meat, and contaminated water were standard. Many patients became sick from eating, but refusing food meant starvation. Guards claimed bad food was appropriate for mad people. Water was particularly hazardous. Drawn from polluted sources and stored in dirty containers, it caused diseases that regularly killed patients. Clean drinking water was reserved for staff and visitors. Mealtimes became lessons in survival rather than nourishment. You learned to eat quickly before someone stole your food, to swallow without tasting, and to be grateful for any calories that might keep you alive. But they weren't done with you yet. Rest was not part of the asylum experience. Patients became unpaid laborers, forced to maintain the very buildings that imprisoned them, sweeping corridors, carrying heavy buckets of human waste, breaking rocks for construction. It was like the worst internship imaginable: no pay, no benefits, and your boss carried a whip instead of a performance review. Those who refused to work faced immediate punishment, beatings with wooden clubs, or shackling in uncomfortable positions for days. Guards made examples of defiant patients to keep others in line. The employee handbook, it seemed, was written by someone who believed workplace safety meant the guard was safe from the workers. Patients also served as unpaid servants for guards and doctors, cleaning their quarters, preparing their meals, washing their clothes. The very people who treated patients like animals expected them to perform domestic duties flawlessly. It was like having house servants whom you also kept in cages and fed table scraps. The asylum functioned like a business, using patient labor to cut costs. Why hire workers when you could force inmates to do everything for free? Construction, maintenance, cooking, cleaning, all done by people supposedly too insane to function in society. The business model was essentially free labor with a side of torture, and somehow this was considered medical treatment. Some patients performed skilled trades they had learned before confinement. Carpenters built furniture for staff quarters, and seamstresses repaired clothing for guards. Their skills were exploited while they received nothing but continued imprisonment. Work was never about rehabilitation. The goal was control and profit, keeping patients busy and tired so they couldn't cause trouble, and generating free labor to reduce operating expenses. The workday lasted from dawn until dark with few breaks. Exhausted patients stumbled through tasks while battling hunger, illness, and restraints. But even after you completed your daily tasks, your day wasn't over. The treatment room was where medieval medicine truly revealed its barbaric nature. Bloodletting was performed with dull knives or broken glass, cutting patients until they fainted from blood loss. It was like visiting a barber who believed your problem was having too much red stuff inside you. Burning hot irons were pressed to scalps and spines to chase out evil. The screams echoed throughout the asylum as heated metal seared flesh. The medical theory, apparently, was that demons were allergic to third-degree burns. Starvation was used as a reset method for violent or unresponsive patients. Guards would withhold all food for days or weeks, convinced that hunger would shock the mind back to sanity. The treatment plan basically involved turning people into hangry skeletons and hoping it fixed their brains. The most disturbing part was that doctors genuinely believed these treatments worked. Every scream was seen as progress. Every sign of weakness was interpreted as the madness leaving the body. Recovery simply meant surviving long enough to pretend you were cured. But as the sun began to set, a different kind of horror would begin. Sunset brought a new kind of dread entertainment time. Some asylums charged admission for visitors to observe patient behavior. People paid money to witness human beings at their lowest point. It was essentially a human zoo where the admission price included a clear conscience and family fun for all ages. Guards staged performances using patients as unwilling actors. They would force people to dance, sing, or fight for the crowd's amusement. Patients who refused were beaten until they complied. The entertainment industry, it seemed, was founded by people who thought gladiator fights needed more mental illness and less professional training. Beatings often occurred in front of audiences to demonstrate the proper treatment of the insane. Guards would explain their methods while striking patients with wooden clubs. Visitors would nod approvingly as they watched human beings being tortured. It was like a medical conference, except the demonstrations involved more screaming, less learning, and no continuing education credits. Revenue from visitors helped fund asylum operations. The more distressed patients looked and acted, the more money spectators paid to see them. This created an incentive to keep people looking as insane as possible. Evening entertainment could last for hours. Patients were forced to maintain performances despite exhaustion, hunger, and pain. And when the crowds finally left and darkness fell, you'd discover what true fear felt like. Darkness brought no peace, only different fears. Corridors plunged into complete blackness because lighting was considered unnecessary for mad people. No candles, no torches, no moonlight through barred windows. It was like living in a horror movie, except the monsters were real, the exit doors were locked, and no one was coming to rescue you. The sounds never ceased. Someone was always in pain. Others were lost in delusions, calling out to people who weren't there. Some patients sang lullabies to comfort themselves. It was nature's cruelest lullaby playlist, guaranteed to keep you awake all night with nightmares as a bonus. Violence between patients escalated at night, when guards couldn't see what was happening. Desperate individuals fought over food scraps, better sleeping spots, or simply from the sheer madness of their situation. Night shift security, it seemed, meant no security at all. Just hoping morning would sort everything out. Guards only intervened if they heard sounds of serious injury, and even then, maybe. Usually, they ignored patient conflicts unless someone was genuinely on the verge of dying. A few broken bones weren't worth investigating. The emergency response system was basically to wait and see if anyone stopped breathing. Some people never survived their first night. The combination of cold, fear, hunger, and despair was too much for bodies and minds already pushed beyond their limits. Death became a form of escape that many patients welcomed. Temperature control was non-existent. Winter nights were brutally cold with no heating, while summer brought stifling heat with no ventilation. Patients shivered or sweated through long hours of darkness. Sleep was nearly impossible, and even when exhaustion finally took over, nightmares would wake you within hours. Dreams of freedom felt like additional torture when you awoke to reality. But for many patients, there was only one way this story would end. When patients died, their bodies were handled like garbage rather than human remains. There was no ceremony, no dignity, no notification of families. Guards would simply drag corpses out of cells and dispose of them as quickly and cheaply as possible. Death wasn't even the end of your problems. Your body could still end up with a worse fate than you had in life. Some bodies were burned in secret to hide evidence of abuse. Others were sold to medical schools for dissection without consent. The afterlife employment opportunities, it seemed, were limited to medical school cadavers or unmarked grave residents with no pension plan. Families were often not told when their relatives died. Some learned by accident months later, while others never found out at all. The asylum would simply stop accepting visits and refuse to answer questions. Customer service, it seems, was invented centuries after these places closed, along with basic human decency. Rooms were reused immediately after deaths. New patients were assigned to cells where previous occupants had just died, sometimes without cleaning the space first. Room turnover was faster than a cheap motel, but with significantly more bodily fluids and zero housekeeping. The death rate was astronomically high, but carefully hidden from public knowledge. Most patients who entered these institutions never left alive. Some patients simply vanished without any record of death. Disease spread rapidly through overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. Plague, dysentery, and infection killed more patients than old age. The cycle continued endlessly. Each morning brought new patients to replace those who had died in the night. This was 24 hours in a medieval lunatic asylum, where survival itself was a miracle, and humanity was the first casualty.